Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Peter, and Peter's done various things, but we ended up talking about when he was in a cult and how he got out of the cult. And it was only during that conversation that I realised how close it nearly happened to me. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. I'm glad you're used to the English people already. Going to make my life a lot easier. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me on.
No, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And you were just saying you've already done a few podcasts in the UK. Just let's, out of sort of kindness to colleagues and stuff, give them a shout out. Who is it you've done already, so people can hear you there as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was Letitia Francis, and I don't even know if that podcast has aired yet. And then Casey Baker has the Cult Vault. I've been on her podcast a couple times. She's out of Liverpool. And I will add, David, that my mother was born in Scotland. So,
right. Cool. Whereabouts?
Roots. She was born in Motherwell, and then my grandfather was from Thurso, way to the north.
Yeah. I know them. Well, I know Motherwell, not Thurso. I don't know it well. But, all right. And so where are you currently in the States?
I'm in Montana, so just outside of Bozeman, Montana. So think of it as kind of just north of Yellowstone National Park. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I was going to say, as soon as you say Montana, everyone just thinks Yellowstone.
Yeah, exactly. And the TV show as well.
Yeah. I mean I imagine, because I've never been to Montana, I'm going to imagine no picture can do it justice.
Oh, correct. And I'm an author, but real estate pays the bills, and so I'll get some really nice listings, and a house will have a view, and you can take a photo of it, and it's just whatever, and then you go and see the property, and your jaw hits the floor. The views are amazing.
Yeah, it's one of the things that if you live somewhere with a landscape. You do mean, and I would imagine, because like I said, I've never been there, but with Montana, that it's seasonal, and you've got your seasons. So, tomorrow's picture could look much different, and no photograph will ever blow your mind like standing there looking at it.
Right. We sometimes joke about Montana, and I used to live in Idaho as well, and so it's the seasons, how the weather could change so fast, and the joke is like, well, last year's summer was on a Tuesday.
Yeah,
because there's so much cold weather.
You have good summers, though, don't you, or not?
Oh, summers are beautiful. Yeah, they're we have snow for quite a few months, but boy, the summers make it worthwhile. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. No, that's true. And whereabouts were you born then? You said your mum was from Scotland.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Ridgewood, New Jersey, so that would be, I think, 20 to 25 minutes right outside of New York City. So my grandfather came over from Scotland on the boat to Ellis Island, 1927, and so then, he and all of his siblings followed, and so all of the Swanson clan, that was my mother's maiden name, Swanson, just like so many other Europeans, they would settle in these neighborhoods, with the Irish and the Italian, and so the Scottish Swanson settled in kind of central New Jersey.
Oh, cool. So that's got to be different, New Jersey to Montana.
It's very different, and you could not pay me enough money to move back to New Jersey.
Yeah, no, and I don't imagine it's how you grew up in it anyway. I'd imagine it's just completely changed.
I went back in October, and I hadn't been back in years, and it's just so busy. It's so crowded, but it might not have changed that much. It's more my perception. I live in this massive state with barely over 1 million people, and we have a lot of open space. There's not a lot of open space in New Jersey.
No, there definitely isn't, and certainly not compared to Montana. Because that's actually something it's fascinating about There's a couple of states in America that are like genuinely massive.
Oh no.
And there's less than 1 million, or just a couple of million people living there. And
yeah, Montana's just over now. Montana's about 1.1 because it's been seen explosive growth. But Wyoming, we border Wyoming. It's not as big, but it's still big. And there's maybe 600,000 people in Wyoming. I mean, it is really desolate.
That's. I mean, as somebody in the UK, I cannot imagine what
Yeah.
that's like. The UK has 70 million people in the UK, and you can fit the UK into Texas. You can fit the whole of United Kingdom into
Yeah.
Texas, and we have 70
Yeah.
million people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
It's
cannot
crazy.
imagine, because I'd imagine Montana is probably close. Is Montana near the size of Texas?
Now, Texas would be bigger. Texas is huge. Alaska is monstrous. Alaska is huge and has nowhere near a million people.
Yeah.
But that's, middle of nowhere. But then Texas would be the second biggest state, and it's quite a bit bigger than Montana. But if you took, let's say, Montana and Wyoming, you'd probably be pretty close to the size of Texas.
Yes.
And those two states combined have well under 2 million people.
Yes. So in those two states, 2 million versus
Yeah.
70 million in the UK.
Yeah.
and I
It's a
cannot.
big
Yeah,
difference.
I cannot get over when people talk about that. Like, oh yeah, well, there's a million people in this. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
okay, we're quite busy in the UK. There's no space. But,
Yeah.
so, but we're talking today predominantly about your three books: The Tall Man, Save the Tiger, and the
Yep.
Thomas Connor series. Is that correct?
Correct.
So,
Yeah, and it's the memoir is Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger.
so where do we start with the books then?
Well, I think the the book that most people are really interested in that kind of has the wider appeal or wider audience is the memoir Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger because it's just such a crazy and fascinating story.
What's it? Yeah, but what is in what way? What happened? Who's it about? What's it about?
Sure. So it's my story of my journey in and out of a tiny but destructive religious cult. So I met the love of my life back in 1997. I call her Paige in my book. She brought with her to the marriage, or really I joined this tiny cult because she grew up in a cult where Uncle Robert was the leader, and he was not related to any of us. He was born and raised in Syria, but he had developed a very parasitic relationship with my in-laws before Paige was even born. So again, Paige grew up where Uncle Robert was the expert on everything. And I knew he was a little weird. I knew he had a strong role in her life before we got engaged. And I knew I couldn't, marry this woman until I met the guy. So I did finally meet him a few months after we started dating. And I thought he was kind of odd and eccentric, but relatively harmless. And I was dead wrong. So then we got married, and then I was the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water. So I went along to get along because trying to save my marriage, I love my wife. And she revered and adored the man and believed in everything that he said. And then, fast forward 20 years later, I was finally brainwashed, but it was never good enough. So our marriage was destroyed. My children were taught I was the devil, and I hit rock bottom. But I got out, and I was saved from a cult.
It's interesting because I. So, how did it happen for for her family? How did they end up in it?
Yeah. So her parents were kind of mixed. One was from the U.S., one was from Canada. And so then they married and settled outside of Vancouver. And then they went to a tiny seminary in California where they met this Uncle Robert. His real name is Robert Booty. Again, he came over from Syria, met an American woman, fairly normal lady. They got married. So they met at the seminary and, instantly kind of glommed onto each other. Again, a very parasitic relationship where Robert was very dominating. And I would probably say that that's where the cult started. And then Paige was one of five kids. And so again, they lived in the interior of British Columbia, middle of nowhere, and Robert lived in California. So even from a distance, they would visit or they would have phone calls. But he exerted his control over that family starting in the early 70s.
What was it he believed then?
Well, there's a lot of things he believed in, and I feel like cult leaders really first and foremost believe in themselves.
Yeah.
But he would believe that he was, kind of more Christian than anybody. So he knew the Bible very well, and he had his own very particular theology and ideology. Um, and he would, of course, taught that to all of us. So again, he would claim that he is a Christian. Yeah, it's if you, I think if you read my book, you would doubt that for sure. But yeah, I guess really when it comes right down to it, his core belief would be a mixture of he has all the answers, only he knows the true gospel. And then from there, one of his core beliefs was that every war, recession, depression, plane crash, you name it, was a Jewish conspiracy to control the world and dominate Christians. And there's a reason for that. And for him, you got to go back to, if you know your Bible, there's Jacob and Esau, and they're the brothers, and Jacob steals the birthright from Esau. Esau becomes Edom, which becomes modern Jewry. Jacob is kind of the father of all the Christians in the world, and so the descendants of Esau have been trying to get the birthright back ever since, and they do that through usury and the central bank, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, cults are a fascinating. I've had a little brush with them myself, and it just started off as a simple meditation group. I just used to turn up once a week, and I would meditate. That's all it was. It was just a free thing that they used to do it a few times a week. I used to just go one morning a week, and people would just turn up, just meditate, chant a couple of chants, and that was all it was. And then it's a little further down the line, you're doing courses. They say, oh, would you like to learn more about meditation, more about this,
Right.
more about that, and it starts off quite innocently, and you're just like, yeah, do you know what? I could learn a bit more about spirituality. I could learn a little bit more about breath and breathing and the importance of meditation, and
Right.
then before you know it, people have got funny names, and there's
Right.
somebody that's a leader, and they've got their own books and their own literature, and you're just like, oh, hang on a second, that's not quite what. But this was, I never realised it. I was with a girl at the time, and I never realised quite what was going on, which sounds very strange, because it was. In hindsight, you look back and it's kind of like, well, it was all there. The writing was literally on the wall, and I had a girlfriend who I was in a long distance relationship with, and she was coming over to see me. So I was just like, yeah, I won't be back around for a week or two, because my girlfriend's going to be here. And they were like, maybe she would like to come and spend some time here instead. I was like, well, no, we're going to spend some time together. And it turned really
Right.
funny into like, you maybe need to introduce her, and remember, you don't own her, and maybe she would like to make a choice. And I was just like, well, one, you don't know my girlfriend, and she already thinks you're a bunch of nutters, and but there was this weird thing. It's just like, well, no, you have to, introduce her, and you have to ask her to come and do these courses and come and sort of hang out for a bit. She doesn't need to spend that time with you, and that was when I kind of realised. Well, that was the beginning of the end of it for me, because I was just like, no, this is something I just do to practice a group meditation, really. Do you know what I mean? And nothing more than that. And it's kind of now becoming intrusive. But consequently, I then found out people who had spent thousands there and
Wow.
doing courses, and had become indoctrinated into thinking this was their path to light, and all of that. And like I said, it was just like it. But I escaped it. I never got that deep into it. But later, I would meet people who had got really deep into it, and some of them had spent thousands, if not tens of thousands, on courses, each one promising a little bit more enlightenment that was going to bring them about to a better life. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's shocking how it happens and how people get involved.
Well, your story is probably one that's similar to a lot of people's story, because I say that no one ever knowingly joins a cult. They always think they're joining something else, So for you, you know, it's meditation, it could be, you know, a Bible study, it could be a church, it could be a self-actualization course, whatever it is, right? And no one ever knows they're in a cult. They only know they were in a cult
Mm.
because cults all are two things. At their core, they share a leader, and then they share undue manipulative mind control. So if the cult is working and you're in it, you don't know it because your mind is controlled. And so it's always something better. It's always something more sublime. And it's only the people on the outside that truly know it. So in your case, you were kind of fortunate in that you didn't really head down the road to where you were brainwashed, because once you become brainwashed, it's very hard to get out. It's very hard to extricate yourself because cult leaders are very persuasive and very manipulative. So in my case with Uncle Robert, you know, I never thought it was a cult until I really got out, started to research cults, and I didn't even want to admit it was a cult.
Mm.
And as I did the research, it was inescapable that it really was a cult. And cult leaders, you know, they don't start off spouting utter nonsense and lies to lure you in. They share the truth. And so in our case, Uncle Robert really knew the Bible, and he would read to us from the Bible. So the analogy I give to describe, you know, the process of kind of getting sucked in was that if you miss hit a golf ball, you know, by about this much, you know, quarter of an inch, eighth of an inch, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left or way off to the right, nowhere near where you wanted that ball to go. Well, to continue the analogy, Uncle Robert would read us to the Bible, read us the Bible, and then he would take each and every verse and give it his own unique little perverse twist and spin. So that 5, 10, 15 years down the road, we're nowhere near what the Bible, I believe, is trying to tell us. But it was a very subtle process that took a lot of time. So I can look back at some of the things that Robert taught me and introduced me to, ideas about theology and politics and economics, et cetera, and think, well, that was great information. But then he would take it a little bit
Yeah.
further, and all of that knowledge that he had, you know, would then be used to cement his control over us. He's the expert, and we're just learning. We're babes, and without him, we wouldn't survive in this world.
How many, do you know roughly how many were in this cult?
It was a very small cult, probably at its most, you know, 15 to 20 people, maybe, and that would be comprised of adults and children. So, you know, my wife and I, we had 5 kids, and so they were in it. Probably had no idea what was going on. So, and then a few other kids and a few adults. So again, at, you know, between 15 and 20, probably at its peak. And I think often people, when they think of cults, they think of,
Mm.
let's say, David Koresh or Heaven's Gate, Jim Jones drinking the Kool-Aid. They think of groups, you know, that are larger. But there are a few, you know, cult experts that have written books on cults that will tell you that, you know, there's been kind of a rise in small, kind of micro cults, as they call them. And that was my experience. Our cult was very small, and we were not out on the street corner, you know, trying to sell flowers to raise money or trying to proselytize and gain new converts. We really protected Robert and kind of circled the wagons around him to try and keep, or let's say, maintain his control and not really bring in a lot of people, because other people on the outside could be a threat. They'd be a threat to Uncle Robert because they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand him. And that, of course, is a danger to all cult leaders.
Yes. Because the thing that I think is one of the things that is fascinating and baffling is when somebody talks about a cult, and the discussion like you and I are having now is always in hindsight. Everyone is convinced it wouldn't happen to them. They're just convinced it couldn't happen to them. And you can't get people to explain. Like you said, you met your wife, the love of your life, and there's this bloke who's introduced as Uncle Bob. And he seems a bit
Bob,
weird.
I like that. No one ever called him Uncle Bob, but that's okay.
And but you know what I mean? It was a bit weird. That, like you said, you met him and you thought he was a bit strange. But I've met lots of family, friends, or distant relatives that are a little bit quirky, and so there's a normality to it. And then if you are a religious person, if you are if you have a faith of some description, somebody who seems or appears to have a deep, and like you said, he did, in terms of theological knowledge, had a deep understanding and a deep knowledge of the Bible. Well,
Right.
that's a fascinating person to talk to, if it shares your faith. That can, because every single one of these faiths has a legitimacy or some saying that is when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, or some.
Right.
So
Right.
you can end up getting into conversation with these people just out of pure curiosity and a wish to understand your faith better. It's
Yeah. So, I would have been the same way, David, prior to all of this. I would have thought, well, I'll never fall for a cult. You'd have to be so stupid, and naive to fall for a cult. And now that I've gotten out of it, when people say that, I just say, okay, yeah, I nod and say whatever. But I do know that it could really happen to anybody. In my case, it would have never happened to me if had it not been for my wife. I loved her, and I went along to get along with the cult leader. So yeah, it could happen to anybody, and I'm sure that the circumstances. There's probably a million different ways it does happen where people find themselves sucked in, or find themselves completely trapped, and then when they get out, they can look back. And hindsight is not always 2020, but it can be 2020. And in my case, I think, well, what if I had confronted my wife or confronted Uncle Robert, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and had said something? And for many years, I did. I thought the guy was nuts, and I did confront my wife very early on. It was shortly after 9/11. And, I had high school classmates that were in the buildings in the World Trade Centers when they came down. Well, they got out. I had a high school classmate who was widowed that day. So 9/11 was a very,
yeah,
poignant moment. And that was when, Uncle Robert, we would have these conferences where he would come and talk to us, and just, we'd sit around and listen to him for hours and hours a day. And he said that, 80,000 people died on 9/11, and basically blamed it all on the Jews. And that was my first introduction to his, hatred for Jewish people. And I remember being stunned that it was very dark. I was almost scared. And I remember telling my wife, I said, I don't think this guy is who you think he is. I think he's a danger, and we should have nothing to do with him. And I never followed up on that conversation. I never pressed the issue. And if I had, she probably would have left me then, and we might not have had the 5 kids that we did. So like I say, hindsight can be 2020, but
mm.
you know, not always.
Yeah. It's what. So, did your wife ever doubt him?
Well, that is a fascinating question, because the title of my book, again, is called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. It comes from a dream that I do believe the Lord gave her. So she had this dream shortly before we met, and I'll try and condense it. It's fairly simple. She's in a house, and there's a tiger in the house, and if the tiger finds her, it's going to kill her. She doesn't want to kill the tiger. She just kind of wants to know where it is, just kind of keep an eye on the thing, because the tiger represents strength and honor and dignity and knowledge and wisdom, etc. So she doesn't want to kill it. She just wants to kind of control it. And so then the door of the house opens, and in comes a tall man, but she can't see the face of the tall man. So she hides, and then there's a boyfriend she had at the time, not me, because this is before we met. He disappears, she hides, and she's worried because she knows the tall man is there to get rid of the tiger and kill it. And that's not what she wants to have happen. So she sends this, dream letter to Uncle Robert, who then interprets it and writes this crazy letter back to her. And in it, he twists it around to make himself the tall man, even though he was about 5'6". And the tiger is Paige. He convinces her that since she doesn't want to kill the tiger, she's not truly saved, she's not a Christian. And this is what cult leaders do. They act as a gatekeeper to God. But she kind of was starting to doubt just a little bit. And it was a very pivotal moment in her life, because he used that dream to completely turn it on his head, make himself the tall man, make her the villain. And so she needed to be saved by him. When, clearly 20 years later, I could look back, and I was told about this dream early on, because we started dating like a month or two after she had the dream. And I'm 6'5". She didn't know who I was, so she didn't know my face, and she couldn't see the face of the tall man. So listen, I'm not here to save anybody, but it's pretty clear I was the tall man.
Yeah.
I was there to get rid of the tiger, which was Uncle Robert. He's the tiger. He's the one that's, threatening her life. And to me, that was a warning from the Lord, and she did not heed it. He manipulated it and cemented his control over her. And then for the next 20 years, because we got married a few months later, she really spent that entire time, subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, trying to defend the tiger from me, to protect him from me. And I didn't know at the time either. But I can look back and say, yeah, our whole marriage, she always revered and respected him in a way she didn't me.
And her parents were the same?
Very much so. So they're all about the same age. They're in their late 70s, early 80s, and they call him dad. And it's a very unhealthy relationship. It's very hard to watch. But they would have been also believers and saved and, been baptized and acknowledged Christ as their Lord and Savior well before they met Robert Booty. But, one of the traits of cult leaders is they act as, a gatekeeper to whatever
Yeah.
God you believe in. And so they would have, he caused, Paige's parents to doubt their faith. So they all then became saved, quote unquote, later on in life by him. So did Paige because of the dream. Then eventually it happened to me as well. But yes, Paige's parents, it's hard to describe how sycophantic they are and how brainwashed, I guess, they are towards Robert. I can give you one instance. You sit down and you pray before your meal, right? And other times you might pray. And in over 20 years, I never heard Paige's father say a prayer, even if it's just, Lord, thank you for this meal, right? Without thanking the Lord for Uncle Robert. Every single prayer. Not one time did he ever pray and not mention that.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre. It is bizarre that because one of the things when we were talking earlier that I remember, I would describe the two groups the two types of people that were there. There were people like me who just had an interest in spirituality, and so going somewhere, learning a bit more about structured meditation rather than just meditating at home from what you've read in a book. There was an interest in that, and people that had, these people had studied meditations from others and obviously kind of put that into their own practices. And of course you're just learning that, like I said, just with an interest in meditation and where it comes from. And then there was another group of people who I would describe as not having many friends and were loners and maybe lacked confidence and self-esteem. So, and the thing we all had in common is we were searching for something. And the people that were probably that were the more the loners and had low confidence, that they were able to have, basically have friends, which they didn't have beforehand, because now we're all in the same group. We're, no different than anybody that goes to a church and they meet people at church groups and they become friends and they start to hang out. So now they're not lonely and they've got confidence, and some of them get into relationships and stuff. And it's all centralized around this organization. And then, like I said, so people like me, who I had plenty of friends, I already had a girlfriend, I didn't need any additional structure, but I was searching for something spiritually that I hadn't yet found. And so actually doing some intensive meditation courses is no different than doing a retreat anywhere. You know what I mean? It's, but like I said, as you get further down the line, you start realizing actually just how structured this is, how kind of, I definitely never at the time saw it as a cult, but definitely did as I was exiting. And I was just like, yeah. And actually one of those things as well that you said that I didn't pick up on initially is they want you to kind of either bring friends in or distance yourself from your friends.
Right.
It's just like, no, no,
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, on what you said, I do believe there is a difference between a true cult and a group, a church, whatever you want to call it, an organization that has really dysfunctional culture. And so, I don't know about the meditation group you were in. What was it really a cult, or was it just, a group that's got some really kind of unhealthy, dysfunctional culture? I think we see a lot of that. I think there's probably far more of that. That's far more prevalent than actual cults. But, maybe I'm splitting hairs. But also speaking to, how you joined and then the loners who joined, cult leaders prey on those that are very vulnerable.
mm,
And so when you are alone, you are much more vulnerable. So one of the lessons from my story that I share is that, in the Christian faith, there's the idea about the body of believers, how we're all in it together. And so, if I cut off my thumb, I'm not going to die, but my thumb will die. So when you get kind of cut off from your friends, from your support group, whether it's, Bible study or bowling league, right? And your relatives, then you become isolated. And that's when you're most vulnerable. Because when you're isolated, you're not hearing a number of voices. You're really only hearing just the one voice, the cult leader, which is what they want. So there's no one in your life saying, over a cup of coffee, David, you mentioned this, he said what?
mm.
this guy at the meditation group said, what did he say? And there was no one in your life then to keep you accountable. And I'm not saying you, but like in my life, we eventually cut out all the other voices. So, like for instance, Paige and I, we would go to church after church after church, and then we would leave every one of those churches because she would get on the phone, she'd call Uncle Robert and say, well, this is what the pastor said. And only Uncle Robert knew the true gospel. So every pastor was wrong. They were spouting blasphemy. So we would leave. So we stopped going to church. And then we would have home church, which was just really my wife and I and our kids. So we weren't fellowshipping with other believers. We were like that thumb that got cut
Yeah,
off and severed. And that's a very dangerous position to be in.
yeah. The group that I knew, as the courses kind of grew, they almost came like it went from just like doing a course just to like a retreat to, well, now this is actually a qualification. If you're qualified, you can teach this, but you have to do this, because then once you've done that, you can then be elevated to the next level and you can learn that. But to do that next level, you have to swear allegiance to this person as your teacher and do whatever is required. And they all swore their allegiance to somebody who lived, I think he had a retreat in France and was originally from Germany. And but you couldn't go there unless you'd done these X amount of courses, which all cost money. And
Right. Right.
to do that, the whoever was the head of that kind of the house or whatever of the group that you were in, you literally had to swear allegiance to them like they were your master. And
Right.
they could then, at that point, you couldn't make certain life decisions without consulting them first, and you needed their permission.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I just read a book this summer called Cultish. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think it came out a few years ago, but it's a fascinating book. I don't necessarily agree with everything the author talked about. Her premise is that, cults, their control begins and ends with language, the manipulation of language. But she kind of talks about, like multi-level marketing groups and
yeah,
even like exercise groups like CrossFit. She doesn't go to CrossFit, but there's another group. She kind of calls them cult-ish. It's kind of not
mm,
really a cult, but kind of close to a cult, kind of like, boy, that's where I would say it's kind of the unhealthy culture versus a true cult. This is kind of the Peter Young's, Cult 101, based on my experience and all the research that I've done. And people will ask me, well, is Mormonism a cult? Is this religion a cult? Is that a cult? And I would say, no, as a Christian, I just believe they're false religions. I believe there's one true faith, it's Christianity. And other ones I would say are a false religion. Because I would say that because to me, a true cult really only has one leader.
yeah,
A cult leader would never be able to share the power with deacons or whatever you want to call them, right, in a different faith. And they probably wouldn't have a line of succession either, because once I die as the cult leader, well, it's the world's going to come to an end because nobody could
mm,
pick up the torch. I die. So I really kind of feel like that's one attribute of a true cult is that it's just one guy, man or woman. They would never share power or authority.
Yeah. When but one point though, you were kind of completely. Were you at any point completely on board with this?
Close. So, and we would have these conferences. Okay, so Paige's parents lived in northern Idaho. It was a very kind of remote wooded area, and Robert would travel from Southern California, which would probably look more like where you live, urban area. And the conferences, we would kind of sit around in the living room, just listen to him talk for hours and hours and hours. And one year, we would do this twice a year, maybe. One year, he said, everybody, bring your testimony. Your testimony is basically what has the Lord done for you in your life? How did you become a Christian? And this is about 17 years into our marriage. And the bloom was certainly off the rose at this point. I knew that she was very dissatisfied. I knew that she did not respect or honor me or love me the way she did Robert and her father and brother, because they were both brainwashed in the cult as well. And I was the one that would always ask questions, right? Cult leaders hate questions. And I would ask the questions. Well, can you give me more information about the Jews trying to control the world? Like, can you answer some of these questions?
Can I have an
And the answer I would
example?
always get back is,
Some proof?
yeah, a little bit more evidence, please. Um, and I never got a good answer. The answer was always, Peter, why are you so stupid that you don't understand me? So, 17, 18 years into our marriage, we have this one conference. And for me, it's less of trying to become a true believer, and it's more of what can I do to bring the love back to my marriage? Because I knew my wife truly didn't respect me at that moment. So then I kind of caved and felt like, well, maybe I missed something about the Christian faith that I never knew, even though I grew up in a Christian home. I'd been baptized, I'd read the Bible, professed my faith, on and on and on, right? Christianity is pretty simple. It's a gift, right? You
Yeah.
can't earn it. But with this guy, you had to earn it. And so then I went through that. Well, I must have not known it. So I kind of, quote unquote, allowed myself to be saved. And that kind of started the process of, I was probably brainwashed for about 2 years to where, I finally saw him to be, this brilliant man. And I had wasted all these years by doubting him. And I was all in. But even in those moments of being all in, there was still something that kind of nagged me in the back of my mind, in a little crevice of my soul, like, this doesn't feel right. And I still truly believe that I was brainwashed. Again, for less than 3 years, 2.5 years, I was all in. But even then, something in the back of my mind just felt a little off. Like I was never comfortable around him. Whereas my wife, my in-laws, and my wife's older brother, and just like the few other people on the outside of this cult, they just revered and adored him, literally bowed down, man, called him dad, would hold his hand and cry and sob because, they learned so much from this man. And I was always uncomfortable. I just never knew what was going to come out of his mouth next. Always a little off balance.
That's. Yeah. So when you realised, what happened next?
Well, it's more along the lines of what happened before I realized. So I'll just give you a few examples of how brainwashed Paige was and his control over her. We had 5 children. We had talked about having a sixth. We had a date night. This is, again, 17, 18 years into our marriage. And she got all dressed up and we go out for coffee. And she tells me of a burning desire to have another child. She wants to have another son, but she wanted to have it for Uncle Robert. Uncle Robert had 2 sons, and then he had granddaughters, no grandsons. Well, Paige thought it would be a travesty, like the world would come to an end, figuratively, unless Uncle Robert's precious bloodline could be continued through a grandson. We had to continue his lineage. And she wanted to be a surrogate and provide a male grandson through one of his sons. And I was repulsed by this idea.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't want it to happen, so it didn't, which, kind of further distanced me from her. And she moved closer into his orbit. A few years prior to that, I had lost my wedding band. Couldn't find it, so finally bought a new one. 7, 8 years later, I found the old one. It was in an old coat pocket. And so now I had 2 wedding bands. And lo and behold, Uncle Robert had lost his wedding band a few months prior. So now, 10, 15 years into our marriage, I've got two wedding bands. And Paige, you know, kind of highly suggested that I should do the right thing and give Uncle Robert my extra wedding band. And again, I'm like, tell him to buy his own.
Yeah.
This is our wedding band. But I did. I sent my wedding band to him. So then, about 20 years in, I was just never pure enough. I never devoted enough to Uncle Robert, even though, she had doubted my faith all these years and I'd supposedly been saved by him. It was never enough. So she left me. And that was right when Trump got elected. I was about to be inaugurated for the first time. So she and Uncle Robert went to Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks to kind of be around the events surrounding the inauguration. And cult leaders have a grandiose sense of self. So Robert would roll the halls of Congress and talk to congressmen and senators and, share his particular gospel as if everybody was going to listen to him. And that was almost like their figurative honeymoon. And so then when that happened, I was devastated, losing my marriage. And then she and Robert went on this vicious campaign to teach all five of our children that I was the devil, that I was Satan and a sorcerer and an alien and a bloodline and a sperm donor. Whereas 2 years prior, Uncle Robert's bloodline was so precious that, she was going to be surrogate to protect it. And now, because of how awful I am, she's using bloodline of sperm donor as a pejorative to denigrate me in the eyes of our children. And when that happened, that was kind of the first light bulb moment. It was only a flicker. It wasn't a true light, but just a flicker where I thought, wait a minute, that is wrong. And that started the process of finally unwinding and undoing the brainwashing. But it took a while.
Yeah, like you say, but once that light, even if it's just a flicker though, it kind of in the darkness is bright.
Yeah, it's what is darkness? It's the absence of light, right? So, light comes in and the darkness kind of retreats. And so even though I'd only been brainwashed for like 2 or 3 years, it took a full year at least for me to really see that, for years I had thought Uncle Robert was the solution to my failing marriage, when in fact he was the problem. He was the problem from beginning to end. And as long as he had that authority in Paige's life, our marriage was doomed before we ever even got married. And the only thing that could have saved our marriage was, just getting rid of Uncle Robert and Paige no longer being brainwashed by him. And so when she first left me, I was a shell of a man. I was afraid of my own shadow, walking on eggshells. And I took full responsibility. And I thought it was all my fault. So then I told our children, I take responsibility. I am sorry. I love you. And I still love your mom. And then Paige said, well, why did you tell the children that? And I said, because it's true. And she says, no, you only thought you loved me. You lied to the children. Because she couldn't have the kids thinking, well, if daddy still loves mommy, why did mommy leave daddy? Couldn't be her fault. It had to be mine. So that's why the vicious campaign to cast me as the devil was inaugurated, because there's no way Uncle Robert would allow Paige to take the blame for the failed marriage. So then fast forward a year later, and I'm finally realizing, well, maybe it wasn't me. I loved my wife. I was faithful to her. I didn't want the divorce. I did everything I could to love this woman and to keep our marriage strong. And she and Uncle Robert burned it to the ground.
And do you have any contact at all with the children now?
I do. So she left me in January and then filed for divorce in around Thanksgiving 2017. Again, I was devastated. Never suicidal, but couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was a wreck, physically and mentally, emotionally, spiritually, just crushed. But then my family rallied around me. I finally told them. They had no idea what was going on. About 4 months after she left me, I finally reached out to my parents, and my brothers and their spouses lived around the country. I'm the youngest of five. And they all immediately supported me, helped me get good lawyers. And so when she filed for divorce, I said, no, I don't want to get divorced, and I don't want the kids to, be out of my life. So we got a guardian ad litem involved, and a guardian ad litem is there to look after the best interests of the children. And so this first one wrote a jaw-dropping 50-page report The court adopted it and sent the three youngest back to me. When she left, she took the three youngest with her. The two oldest were high school and college, so they didn't go with her. But the court sent those three back to me, and so they lived with me. Well, the youngest two still live with me. It's been almost 8 years.
Okay.
And she had supervised visits for all those years because the court saw how bad it was. Um, they saw the parental alienation and they saw the cult influence.
And have you been able to pull your children away from it completely?
With mixed results. So, I wrote my book initially, that my memoir, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, for them because they really only heard one side of the story, and that was hers, and that was Uncle Robert's and their grandparents, Paige's parents. And then the whole Young family, my side of the family, of course, we're not perfect, but we're healthy. We're not in a
Yeah.
cult, and we don't behave the way that they do. But the kids really, just for some reason, their mother was very persuasive. That's the story that they believed in. So with the youngest three, they still love their mom as they should, but they realized that Uncle Robert was wicked, and that their mother had a very unhealthy relationship with him. That the cult was real, that it was damaging. But not every child at this point feels this way. So with some of the children, I have a great relationship. With other ones, it's very strained. But parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And I pray for those children who are in their 20s now that one day we could have a healthy, respectful father-son, father-daughter relationship. But it's going to take time.
Are they still under the influence of Robert then?
I don't know. Again, cults use isolation, paranoia, and secrecy to maintain control. And Robert used all of that, and Paige and her parents adopted all of that. We had to shred our trash. We couldn't say certain words like Jew or Israel or Gentile on a cell phone because, of course, all the Jews are listening. So there's all kinds of secrecy and paranoia. And Paige and her parents and Robert still engage in that. So with three of my children, I don't hear from them very much, and nothing is shared with me. So I have not heard from Uncle Robert since 2017. Paige and I only have the most limited communications, simply just to deal with the logistics of the youngest children who still live with me full time, and she still visits. So all that to say is, I don't know if they have any contact with Robert. I do know that her behavior and attitude towards me has not changed a bit. If anything, it's kind of gotten worse over the years. So I'm fairly certain that she's still in contact. And if not in contact with Robert, certainly the brainwashing has not diminished at all because of the things she does and says. And I think the older children, my guess is they don't really have any contact with him anymore. But all of the damage done to them still needs to be unwound, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I'd imagine as well that if they now, I don't want to, I don't want to talk out of turn, but I'm trying to figure out whether that they look at it and see it as a fraud, and in some way say, well, that's your fault. We got caught up in the fraud, or that everything was fine and now it's not because you left. It's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, whichever way you go with it.
Well, that is for sure. So, first of all, I can tell you that with all of the children, I did apologize to them later on once I had healed, once the Lord had opened my eyes and ears to the truth that I had been in a cult and that He rescued me. And I believe He rescued me through my faith and my friends and family as they were able to help me see all this, right? It's not mystical, it's concrete. The Lord used my friends and family to open my eyes to all this. Okay. So then I apologized to all the children, and not in a way of, well, it's my fault that your mother and I got divorced, is not, my fault for this or that. What I take responsibility for, and it is my fault, is I did not protect my wife, my marriage, and my family from this narcissistic, wicked cult leader. That is my fault. Now, that would have been a big task and a big job, but I should have done it. I should have done a better job of protecting my family. I did not, endorse the cult or endorse the breakup of my marriage. That is on other people, not me. But I did tell the children that, it's my fault, and I apologize to them for that. So I think what I can tell you in terms of their worldview is um, it seems like they have really kind of rejected their Christian faith that they were raised in. And how do you blame them, right? I mean, with what went on in our home as they were growing up in their formative years, you can understand why they would want to kind of distance themselves and say, I'm not having anything to do with this. And people will say to me, well, it's great that you didn't lose your faith through all this. And my answer is, well, without my Christian faith, I wouldn't be here. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be alive. Because I know that it was, it had never gone away. My eyes had been, let's say, kind of like blurry. My vision had been blurred. But, there's a parable in the Bible about the shepherd that has 100 sheep and one of them is gone, it's missing. And the shepherd leaves the 99 to go after the one. Well, I was the one. For a couple of years, I was wandering lost. And the Lord, rescued me. And so I had a foundation before I met Paige, before I met Uncle Robert, of 30 years of good, solid biblical teaching. And so it was easier for me, I would say, to not lose my faith. But my kids didn't have that.
Yeah.
Most of them grew up where it was really dysfunctional.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Yeah, that's probably, like you say, a significance, isn't it? Because you already had something that Robert couldn't give. So,
Mm.
you know,
And nor could he take it away. To me,
yes,
that's the lesson, right? Because he and Paige doubted my faith. Robert said that there's a character in the Bible in the Gospel of Luke that has a legion of demons that Christ has to, save this person from. And he said that I had a legion of demons, that I was demon possessed, demon controlled. I was the devil. And I was incapable of receiving salvation, which is completely unbiblical, I believe. And so just beat me up over and over and over again. And so I tried 5 times to be saved by this guy. And every time, the bar kept getting raised and raised for me to finally be saved, right? Never good enough. And so there's, in not just theory, but in practice, acting as a gatekeeper to God, which again is unbiblical.
Li- and like you say, the mark of every good cult leader is the gatekeeper.
Right.
They are,
Because that's an essential role, right? They have to make themselves
yeah,
essential to be needed by you.
and that was kind of like I said, is the more that I'd spent time with these people, the more I realised every solution you may or may not have been looking for was they had the solution. They were the
Right.
answer, and
Right.
if you ever doubted that, if you ever looked the other way, that was the problem. That's why you're not transforming. That's why you're not moving to the next level, because you and there was never. I always remember. I can't remember. We'd done like a guided meditation on one of these retreats, sort of thing, and you had to explain your experience. And I don't even remember what my experience was today, because it was just like again, it was a hindsight. I was looking back, it's like, oh yeah, that was it. And when I sort of gave the detail of what happened, they were just like, no, that can't happen. You haven't done that yet. You haven't attained that yet. And I was just like, you just asked me what I saw and what I felt, and I've just explained it.
Right.
But they were like, no,
Right.
no, you can't do that yet because we haven't shown you. And I was just like, that
Wow.
makes no sense whatsoever.
So, I think maybe this is one way to put it for your audience that can illustrate just how subtle and pernicious it is. With Robert, he did a very good job of identifying, let's say, the problem. We would talk about central banking. We would talk about um, politics and government, and too much government versus limited government. He would talk about sin. He would read the Bible to us. Okay, so we would cover a lot of interesting topics, and he was very good at diagnosing the problem. The real problem then was his solution was always off base. So when you have someone that speaks your language and you're like, yes, he's right, that is a problem, and that is a problem, and that is a problem. So now he's gained your trust, you're listening to this person, but then you go down the dark road of, well, it's only his solution. And his solution was often maybe not worse than the problem, but pretty close. So then if you doubt him, he'd be like, wait a minute, I've just enlightened you on the problem, why would you not listen to my solution? And of course, the answer is, well, because your solution is cockamamie.
Yeah.
But they have enough control and put enough doubt in your mind that you go down that road with them.
Now that you're out on the other side, and thankfully, your faith in Christianity, your faith in Jesus, was much, much stronger than anything else that Robert could try to manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you compare your faith? And what I mean is, you've kind of said yourself that you genuinely believe that Jesus come to save you, come to help you, came to get you. Look, it's time to come back, sort of thing. So,
Right.
Feeling that level of faith, and I think it's more important and more significant because sometimes I think where people kind of get it wrong is if they feel they strayed off the path, they can feel that they can kind of go down this road of, I don't deserve to be loved by Jesus. I don't deserve to have Jesus' attention or affection. Whereas you're the opposite. You kind of realise that there is no. I was saved by Jesus. Do you know what I mean? It seems to have strengthened your faith. Do you find that for yourself as well?
Yes, there's no question that it strengthened my faith. A couple answers to that I would say is, listen, if we're perfect, we wouldn't need a savior.
Yeah,
We did everything right. We wouldn't need a savior. Jesus was unnecessary. Why did he do it? Right? It's totally unnecessary. I also think that he can often really get our attention and teach us through pain. C.S. Lewis, the great writer, talked about this. He even wrote a book about it called The Problem of Pain. And that pain is often used as a way for the Lord to really get our attention. And clearly that happened in my instance. And then, you look at in the Bible, the disciples, you look at Peter, he denied Christ 3 times. He said he never would. I mean, the disciples were on and on and on, just fumbling and bumbling left and right. And yet they were chosen by Christ to be his disciples. It's kind of an example, like, listen, you're human. You're going to screw up. I get it. Like, don't worry. I got your back. I died for you, right? Like, that's kind of what Christ is saying. And so then I look at my story, and I don't have any guilt and shame anymore at this point. I probably did when it first happened, when I came out of it. I think about, there's a story in the Gospel of Luke, I think it's chapter 8, where there's a guy that is really, controlled by a bunch of demons. And the people in the town can't even control this guy. He lives in caves. Christ saves him, kicks the demons out. And then the man says to Christ, he begs him. He says, can I go with you? And Christ says, no, which is kind of a surprising answer. He says, no, I want you to go home and tell your family what the Lord has done for you. Ah, well, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is what the Lord has done for me. So I come on podcasts, I write my book, I speak publicly. Like, listen, learn from my mistakes. Wow, did I screw up? Okay, but the Lord rescued me. And so now I share my story. It's kind of a cautionary tale. Don't do what I did.
Do you feel your faith is stronger because of it?
No question. And, now I don't look to a wife that I'm afraid of, or I walk around eggshells. I don't look to a guru for approval on every thought or deed or word that comes out of my mouth. I go straight to the Lord. There's a book in the Bible called James, chapter 1. It says, and I'm paraphrasing, if you lack wisdom, ask the Lord and he'll give it to you. Well, I have repeatedly, and he has given me that wisdom, and he has given me strength and everything I asked for, because he says we can trust him. And so I am much more stronger. But the paradox is, because I became so weak, because I really was just crushed and hit rock bottom, and then I bounced on the bottom, and I was bounced on the bottom for a while. I was in the cold deck of the Titanic, man. I was really sinking. And then he rescued me. And it's when you realize just how inept you are of your own volition and of your own efforts, that then you can truly rely on the Lord. And then you are a million times stronger, because your strength comes from the God of the universe.
I agree. I agree completely. It's fascinating that, like you say, it's when you come out of it and you kind of, in a sense, reconcile yourself with Jesus and realize there's nothing to reconcile. It's just like, hey, you don't need to worry about that. I've got this for you. It's okay. We're good. And like you say,
Right.
you're left there with, in that phrase you quoted is, just tell people for me. That's enough.
Right.
You know?
Right. And I always wonder, it's fascinating when I go back to Luke. I'm not trying to make this into a Bible study, but like
Yeah, it's
at
okay.
that moment, the townspeople were afraid and they asked Christ to leave. He's like, please leave. I'm like, wow, why would
Yeah.
they do that? So then I think about that poor guy. He's got demons living in him. He's now healthy and is a sane person. And Christ says, go tell everybody what I've done for you. How did those people receive him? Right? The Bible doesn't say, were they afraid of him? Did they not believe him? Did they discount him? Were they in awe of his story? And I would love to know the reception that man got. And I think about that often because, and the man is not named in the Bible, he's just some guy, because I think about my reception, which has been, other than the people in the cult who think I'm lying and think I'm proving I'm a demon or a devil, everybody else has really resonated with my story. I don't ever feel like people are shaming me or kind of mocking me. I don't feel any guilt. And there are people that are hearing me on podcasts or that read my book and they will reach out to me and they will email me and say, wow, your book is almost as if it was written just for me
Yeah.
because of what they've gone through. And I love that. I love that my story can resonate and help other people.
No, I agree completely, and that probably a perfect place to end. Where can people find you and your book and your website?
We can come visit me in Bozeman, Montana, but short of that, you can find me on my website, which is authorpeteryoung.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon. So what again we've been talking about is my memoir, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. I have written other books. So I used to be a sports broadcaster, and so I've traveled around the world, done cycling and skiing and rodeo and lumberjack, football and basketball. So I love telling
Yeah,
stories.
unfortunately we never got to any of that.
We never got to It's Okay. So I've written two books. One's called The Blue Team. The other one's The Wardrobe of the Wolf. It's a series. The third book in the series will come out next year. I love using sports as a metaphor for life. We learn so much from playing sports, obeying the rules, hard work, respect for authority, etc. So I've got all those books on my website.
Perfect. And lastly, my random question, which is completely random compared to today's conversation. I want you to imagine you have access to a time machine. The time machine is a car of your choice, any car you want.
Okay.
Where would you go, and what would you be listening to on the radio?
Wow. Well, I would probably take that car, which would be probably a truck,
Right.
and I would go back to Pocatello, Idaho, and I would go back to around December or November of 1997, and I would sit down and have a conversation with that young lady that was about to have her life turned upside down and manipulated, and I'd go over that crazy dream letter, and I would say, honey, you need to really know what's going on here, and you need to know the truth. And who knows if that would have changed the tide. I don't know. But it'd be fascinating to go back if I had that ability and try and see what would have happened.
Yeah. I wonder if there was a lesson, it was that you should have walked away.
Great question. Okay, and I will end on this because it's fascinating. After the fact, Uncle Robert, was only a pompous little dictator, narcissistic cult leader could say, he said, if I knew the kind of person you were going to turn out, I would have never let Paige marry you. And Paige had written a letter to Uncle Robert before we got engaged that she never sent. Then 20 years later, after she's left me, she finds this letter, how she kind of had doubts about me. And Robert is pompous. If I had gotten that letter, I would have never let you marry Paige. Well, you know what, Uncle Robert?
Yeah.
I believe Paige sent that letter because he was protecting my five unborn children. And we were to marry, and it was his will that we married because we have 5 wonderful children.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
And that's a perfect place to stop. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, David.
And that was Peter, and some of my own experience. And Peter's experience. And like I said, we never got talking about Peter being a sportscaster and his other book. So please do check out his website, look him up, see what he's got to say for himself. And yeah, just remember, like Peter and I were saying, cult leaders are charismatic people sometimes. They're always certainly controlling. They almost always certainly make you doubt yourself. And they are the gatekeeper. Without a doubt, always the gatekeeper. And it's a gatekeeper that is always offering a solution that only comes through them. And in some ways, if you accept, because you have failed. And it can be tempting. Some of these can be tempting because if you feel that you are missing out on something, if something is missing from your life, it's a temptation because you may for a while find comfort in something that maybe eases loneliness. And with that, as always, please keep safe. Take care of yourself. Thank you everybody that supports the podcast, those that listen, comment, share. It's always appreciated. Thank you very much. And wherever you're from, wherever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.